Welcome to the Me, You and Data podcast, the podcast that uncovers insights from leading data science and analytics professionals globally to enable you to grow your career, teams and business. I'm Joseph Carla, your host and founder at 633 who bring you this podcast. We hope you get value from this episode. Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to the Me, You and Data podcast. And today's guest is Daryl the Cruz. I'm really excited about this conversation. Daryl is now the founder of Hexdon. He was previously the head of data and innovation at Samsung, and he's also part of the DataIQ 100, which lists the top 100 data and analytics practitioners. So Daryl, I've given you a bit of a mini introduction, but do you mind just going in a little bit further and introducing who you are and what you do for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, Joseph, thanks very much for having me on your show. I'm Daryl the Cruz. I have about 20 years industry experience in the data space. And I've worked in organizations large and small. I've worked here in London and across Europe. I've worked across Asia, and I spent a number of years in Australia as well. As you said, I'm a member of the DataIQ 100, which is a really proud moment for me. It's a real privilege to be within the 100, and it's a platform for sharing our voice and developing the industry as it is today. But I look back to how I got into data, and it's a bit of a funny story. When I was a kid, I think it was 1986. Paramount Pictures released a film. It was about a boy called Daryl, but Daryl was actually a robot. And the acronym for Daryl is Data, Analyzing, Robot, Youth, Life Form. So I think Joseph, somewhere in the background, in the back of my head there was like, you're going to get into data because that's what the film says you have to do. So there's something in that that's quite interesting. As you said, I work for Samsung Europe in the CMI team, which stands for Consumer and Market Insight. My role there was all about data innovation. So, really interesting role in helping the business increase its level of data-driven maturity. But I left Samsung last year to set up Hexdon. Hexdon is a consultancy, and it's all about the human experience with data on side. And that's really important because, so many businesses today put the data and technology first, when actually, if you keep that on side and focus on people first, I think you stand a much better chance of success. I'm also a data-driven life coach as well. So a little bit about me.
Perfect. And that's a really good background and kind of intro. And I think it really lays the foundation of what we're going to speak about today, which is really about the people side of things, the human side of things, but really how leading with that can essentially enable organizations to get the most out of their data and really drive a data-driven culture as well. So as it relates to, a people-first approach to data, why is this important and what does that actually mean from your perspective?
Yeah, I think businesses today, I think the industry's moved on so fast, and that's great. I think so many businesses fail when it comes to technology and data-driven projects, and they fail because they don't consider the people first. I've seen it time and time again. You read it in the press and in the industry news as well. The reasons for that is because teams aren't aligned as they could be. It could be that the vision hasn't been set at the beginning. And these are obvious things to say, but actually sometimes it's the basics that really stand out. There's things like getting the buy-in across the stakeholders, across the business as well. And actually things like the skills across the business, if they're not aligned to what the objectives are, then there's going to be an imbalance and perhaps a friction there that you don't really want. The people first focus, that's why I set up Hexdon, right? It's about the human experience first and keeping data on side. People first, that means employees, it means customers, it means customer centricity. It means thinking about people's values, right? Their needs and their wants. And it's about the carrot and the stick as well. But the motivators of behavior, I think, are really front and center when it comes to, being people focused. And when I think of data, I think data is what what you make of it, right? So data is data. You convert it to insight, which gives a bit more value. But that insight becomes really valuable when it's actionable. Goes without saying. But it's actually beyond just the action. It's about the storytelling element of it. It's about, going from, in a business case, the as-is scenario, how a business is today, all the way through to the to-be scenario, the vision for what the future could be, and engaging people along the way. I think that's what being a people business is about when it comes to data. Along with the storytelling perspective, it's about being descriptive, so looking back on data you've looked at in the past, but also being predictive, what's happening in the future, and then also prescriptive too. So if you can bring those sorts of things to life in a program of work, I think it really brings a lot of richness and relevance to people, so they can buy into what's happening. And it's all about the journey, right? So if you think of big brands today, I work for Samsung. There's the likes of Apple and Microsoft. They all tell compelling stories with their brands, and I think there's a compelling story for us as data professionals to do the same with our programs of work. So it's about going on the journey. It's about actually bringing some emotion into what we're doing, what the new way of engaging with customers could be, thanks to the data we have, for example. There's as humans, we're all about identity and our core values. So it's really teasing these things out. And also from a people perspective, there's of course data literacy. So there's a few things there around people and being a people first approach.
Yeah, and I think those, all of those areas, tying those areas together actually make me think, and I totally agree with you as well, Daryl, that, looking at data and digital transformation from the people perspective is so important, because actually it's sometimes about changing human behaviors. So, for example, organizations who aren't necessarily as mature from a data standpoint, or where not necessarily everyone is on the same page, focusing on the people element first enables you to actually get the most out of the data. And from your perspective, and you've kind of done this throughout, like you said, your 20-year career, and really having that focus on, having data literacy across the organization as it relates to, having that people first approach. Are there maybe one or two core examples that you can share with the listeners, just so that people can truly understand what the benefit of that is firsthand?
Yeah, I think from a people first perspective, in some examples, just working with data to connect with people, I think is really important. Whether it's your customers, for example, take the likes of Spotify, right? I love the end of the year when they bring to you your year in highlights, and they show you all the music you've listened to, all the trends that have been there, right? They've got some very sophisticated machine learning models in the background to recommend new artists to you based on what you're listening to. Bringing that to life is so much fun. But then, this week I've seen Uber in my emails and across the app as well. They're connected with us in communities. Obviously, we've got vaccination centres everywhere, and they're inviting their customers to, if they have to travel to a vaccination centre, they'll contribute £15 towards a visit. Right? Yeah. They've also partnered up with Age UK with that initiative, so it's really resonating with communities. And if I think of the Uber team there, they're going to be losing a bit of money on the contributing £15 towards a visit. But the bigger picture is that they're building a community. They're building trust in that community. And from a brand perspective, it's going to elevate the brand, so you have more trust in the brand. So there's lots more around the people perspective that's an impact there. Yeah. And then thinking about media, for example, right? So in the last 12 months, we've had to really think about how we spend our advertising. We've gone from, traditional media, pivoting far more heavily into the digital channels. That's great. And that's the right thing to do. But also at the same time, it's about being customer centric. And that means really driving home those one-to-one relationships with the customer, really thinking about how you can be hyper-personalized. And, campaign orchestration as well is something that's really front and center for a lot of brands right now. Now, this is using data to really drive a change in behavior and trust in a brand.
Yeah.
And of course, authenticity is there too.
Yeah, and that example of Spotify, I didn't know that Uber was kind of using data in that way as it relates to the vaccinations and stuff. So it's really about essentially, utilizing data and leveraging that to build personal relationships and personal bonds as well, externally as well as internally. And as it relates to internally, you're the expert here, but not everyone in an organization is data literate. Not everyone understands the role of data. Not everyone really understands how to leverage that in communication and conversations internally as well. What is data literacy to you in an organization? And I guess, what does the process of increasing it look like?
Let's go to the definition of data literacy so that everyone's aligned on that first. So it's defined as the ability to read, to understand, to create and communicate data as information. That's the first thing. And what's important to know with data literacy, especially when we talk about it in organizations, is that it can be a little bit alienating if you consider it like you're data literate or you're not. That's a very binary way of looking at it, and that's not the way it should be. It's actually a spectrum, right? So you, just like learning language, you're learning Spanish or Italian. When you start on day one, you know nothing. And as you advance over 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, your sliding scale of understanding how to listen and interpret and to communicate and write, it increases. It's not a 1 or a 0. You don't know Spanish or you don't. It's a spectrum of learning. So that's a really important point to make. When I think of data literacy, it's about the domain knowledge as well. So you can be data literate in a marketing team or in a finance team. As an example, marketing, you may need to know what your return on advertising spend is. You may need to know all the digital metrics that go into a KPI framework. From a financial perspective, you don't need to know those digital metrics. You may need to know things like EBITDA, as an example. And the notion of, for example, data literacy in finances or personal finance relates to me individually and to people individually is compounding. So, 20 years ago at university in the student union, drinking a beer cost me £1.50. If I didn't drink that one beer and stuck it in the bank, compounding over 20 years, that'd be worth a lot more now. So if I, let's say, I don't know, drank 100 beers a year less, I don't drink that much. Maybe I did back then. But convert that to cash and compound that, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, compounding is a really interesting way of thinking of data literacy there. But in terms of increasing it for businesses, I think there's so many things that you can do. There are education academies. I was a judge for the DataIQ last year, and there seems to be a growing trend towards businesses really investing in academies for data or academies for business programs. And that's, it's really a testament to the growth and the ability to leverage data as an advantage.
Yeah.
If you need support for yourself individually or in a team, LinkedIn Learning has some great resources. There's Data Camp as well, and Coursera as those 3 examples. In fact, with Coursera, last year in the first lockdown, and I'm no data scientist, I decided to take a course on Coursera, which was set by Johns Hopkins University in the States.
Yeah.
So I did the course called Executive Data Science. That was really interesting. Right? So you've got Jeff Leakes as an example of a really high-end, talented data scientist doing the course. So there's things there you can do to improve your level of literacy. HR involved. There's doing skills assessments. Lots of things from perspective.
And I think that it's happening more in organizations, because there's an understanding and appreciation from executives that actually data has to be a major part of our digital transformation. So not only from the ground up, but also it's being driven from the top down now as well. But organizations who have, for example, a lot of legacy data, or who have maybe a more traditional way of doing things, or perhaps don't necessarily even see themselves as technology organizations, despite the fact that they are now competing, like you mentioned, not just offline, but also across all digital channels, whether that be wearable, mobile, TV, internet. You know, what are some challenges that face organizations when, you know, trying to improve the data literacy internally? And I guess, what are some ways that they can perhaps overcome this?
I think the challenges are there, right? There are so many challenges to this. In the last year, we've been obviously challenged with, you know, where's the revenue going to come from for a lot of businesses? And so retailers, for example, they're looking at closing out the sales week, making sure they're hitting their targets. They're moving so fast towards just driving sales for the next week or the next quarter that a long-term data literacy project is in the back of their minds. It's not in the front and center. So I think it's our leaders, we have to stand up and be accounted for. I think we've got to hold ourselves to account for that, knowing that, you know, we don't want to be part of the data analytics divide. And by that, I mean, there are companies that have a certain level of data-driven maturity who can leverage that to pivot and to change with environmental conditions in business. And there are some companies that don't have that. And they've had to, instead of investing more into data analytics, they're scaling back. So the gap between those that are digitally mature and those that aren't is widening. So, you know, we've got to be very mindful of things like that. Data literacy is a way of keeping the momentum going, making sure we are advancing in terms of maturity. And I think there's also a fear from some leaders around not being data people. And that can be dangerous, right? Because inadvertently you're holding your teams back by perhaps you're not backing them enough, or you're being too risk adverse when everyone else is taking the risk and jumping into the new world. Perhaps you've got to get your finance team involved and really get them on side, because they're ultimately going to sign off the budget to advance your business. And if you have a return on investment calculation, you can hold yourself account to that and say, okay, I'll take the cash, I'll invest in this new capability, hold me to account. I'll have the quant and the qual ways of measuring progress, and let's work together on advancing through the business.
Yeah, so like essentially, I think one of the core themes running through that, Daryl, is bringing everyone on the same page. So as it relates to data native organizations, Daryl, the assumption is sometimes made that these organizations are, you know, automatically highly data literate. And sometimes that's true. Other times it's not. In the times where it's not necessarily true, what are some things that even those organizations on the other side of the data literacy spectrum can consider as it relates to ensuring that they're tight from a data literacy standpoint?
So I've been doing a bit of work with an accelerator called True Altitude, and they're part of a movement that's helping the government to advance in a number of different areas: 5G, autonomous driving, healthcare, etc. And the businesses that are being supported in this accelerator are phenomenal, right? They are at the cutting edge of innovation. They really are. And what we're seeing there is that these businesses, they know their data. They come out of university. They've got, you know, the smartest people working on these new innovations. And what's clear to me is that they're very much domain experts. And I think that is fantastic, right? And that's what's required for them to build their product. Then going into the big wide world, they've got to become domain experts in the market in which they're operating to. Mm. And so that's just the level of growth that these companies have to go through. You can't just sit in your laurels and go, my product's great, that's it. You got to know your market. And so just having an open mind to always learning and always looking for the next piece of advantage you can get. I think that's the way.
Yeah. And I think often you see these organizations, as they go through that journey, they start to bring different people in who actually have experience of the wider technology spectrum to enable them to better communicate with the market. So I think, that's a really good point. And, you know, as it relates to actually getting it right and the value in that, you've been at Samsung, an award-winning project, the Smart BI project. It will be interesting for myself and the listeners to just explore that project and, you know, what that project was about and why it was so transformative.
Yeah, so we started the Smart BI project at the beginning of 2017, and it took about a year to get business case sign-off. And the reason for that is because, a bit of context, so Samsung Europe is essentially the regional office for Samsung Electronics. And they operate with mobile, TV, and digital appliance categories. and helping all the markets to sell more. And my remit was to help the business become more digitally mature and data mature as well. And so it was glaringly obvious when we focused on the data strategy that there was a missing layer in the tech stack, and that was visualizations. Excel, PowerPoint being used everywhere, not just in the regional office, but in the markets as well. And so it became very clear that we needed to implement a BI platform. And we went on the journey. We tried to get sign off. I got knocked back a couple of times because of the complexity of the organization that we work in, right? So it's a Korean organization, but also a Western organization too. But yeah, after a year, we finally got sign off and then very quickly implemented Smart BI, which is essentially powered by ClickSense. So we rolled out the platform to about 450 people. We automated about 2,000 reports, saving 975 days, able to free up so many different data sources, from data sources coming from third-party providers like GfK, bringing in social media data, for example, and data from media agencies, all the digital data that comes with it too. And what was interesting working in the CMI team was the ability to bring in business data. So the CRM elements, the ERP kind of data sources, along with research data that we have on our customers. So really bring a rich level of a data model together, and then serving that to the business across different pillars. There were the customer pillar, market, some understanding how Samsung performs against competitors in different verticals and different price tiers. There's a commercial element, so relationships with our key accounts, and retail as well. So knowing how our retail stores are performing, and actually the retail stores of our key accounts when it comes to sell in and sell out. So yeah, the project went from strength to strength. We won a DataIQ Award in 2019, then one last year as well. That's just a testament to the way the business grew and adopted the platform. In fact, last year we got to a point, and this is before I left, when it grew to be quite a big project, and we wanted to ensure scale and resilience. So we collaborated with the digital team and put it further into the cloud, and set up a DevOps team to really drive home the ROI of that platform.
Yeah, like obviously that was a major win for Samsung across the organization. And, in my experience dealing with executives at the C-suite level, what allows them to gain further buy-in and confidence in data project is successes like that, right? Because it enables them to actually have confidence in the fact that there's actually value in doing that. Do you feel that, those small wins allow data to have more of an important seat at the table of these large organizations?
Absolutely. So it's a case of, with every data project or work stream, providing a business case. And with that business case, you're accounting for what the ROI can potentially be and what the metrics are to measure that as well. I think if you have that all along the way, and you're demonstrating the wins along the way as well, then yeah, you're onto a good thing. But sometimes it's not about measuring it. It's actually about just seeing the value of the data, right? Just literally with your eyes. So the non-measurable aspect of it. One great example is taking the campaign measurement side of things from a Samsung flagship perspective. And rather than that being presented in Excel, putting it into a BI layer where you can visualize it. And you can see from the moment of announcing the unpacked date, so the tease phase, through to unpacking a flagship device, all the way through to being on sale, capturing pre-orders in that time. And then from on sale onwards. And as the campaign progresses, you bring in more data sets as the data becomes available. Yeah. So having that available to senior leaders in the click of a finger, really powerful, and that's the impact.
Yeah. 100%, and it's also good for leaders who maybe aren't from a tech or technology background, because it's very easy for them to see and understand that value. So that's really beneficial. And as it relates to data maturity in organizations, different businesses are at different ends of the spectrum. How can organizations with a low data maturity improve? And actually, like, as an expert in this area, Daryl, would you mind just walking us through what low data maturity actually is?
I think data maturity, it varies, right? It varies from business to business. It depends where your start point is and what people in your industry are doing as well. So I think when it comes to, thinking about increasing data maturity, I think last year I mentioned Gartner did an assessment in, I think, 2019, and they quoted that 87.5% of organizations have low data maturity. So yeah, it's really interesting that they articulate like that. And there are a number of things if you want to become a more mature business to think about. I think firstly, I would say, where's your data strategy? Make sure you've got that in place and make sure that it's aligned to your business outcomes. And, I say it with that tone because you'd be surprised how many businesses don't have a data strategy that's aligned to those outcomes. Businesses often have a digital strategy, but that's not, or digital transformation strategy, but then they don't have a data strategy to underpin that. So, focus on those things first. And along with that, do an assessment. Look at how mature your business actually is. And I'm talking about things like data governance, data quality. I'm talking about leadership. Where do they stand in terms of articulating and supporting this? There's your operating framework. There's risk to think about too. And human behavior, right? How do we in a business work with data? How do we behave when it's presented to us? And of course, technology as well. And there are some other things around an assessment there too. But I think one of the biggest things that leadership buying, make sure you've got that at the beginning, and that will really help. And it goes without saying. With that, state your as-is scenario. Just point out quite clearly what that looks like and where the to-be scenario is and what that could look like as well. And then you start fleshing it out with some business case fundamentals in there to really bring it to life. And that's where you can bring your CFO in or your finance team in to help articulate that.
Yeah, 100%. And that first point that you mentioned, Daryl, around aligning the business objectives and goals to that data strategy, I think that's such an important point because you see some organizations kind of jump on a bandwagon of, for example, data science or machine learning, and suddenly organizations want, small research teams, or they send their data teams out on missions to do cool research projects in an area that isn't necessarily actually aligned to the business goals and objectives. And a lot of money gets wasted. And that's where, sometimes data science projects get that label of not actually adding tangible value to the business. It's because actually at the start, they haven't led with what you mentioned around aligning the data strategy with those business objectives. So that's a really important point, and one that's often overlooked. And as it relates to businesses overlooking things, Daryl, what do businesses with a good data maturity sometimes overlook or don't necessarily consider?
There are definitely a few things there, Joseph, definitely a few things I can think of. I think one of them is really being focused on the culture and the business outcomes. I think even big organizations can lose sight of that sometimes. You can become so big and unruly and there are so many different ways of looking at the business outcomes, and teams are working on different things in different directions. It becomes quite as if you're working against yourself to some extent.
Yeah.
And of course, good is different to many organizations as well. Let's just clarify that point. In terms of marketing spend, right, media spend, some of the big organizations spend hundreds of millions, if not billions, on advertising. And I always question how much they spend on analyzing the impact of that spend. I've often seen a company spend less than 1% on analyzing the actual spend of media and marketing. So, is there enough an analysis around the marketing effectiveness of your spend and your marketing environment, as an example? So, I think that's a real good watch out. And another one extending on from that is I've seen organizations that work with media groups, right? So they've got one brand working on the campaigns from a digital perspective, media buys. And then you've got another business, or maybe the same business, working on measuring the impact of that marketing spend. So it's really important to make sure you're not marking your own homework. So keep an eye out for that one. That's a really interesting one there. I'm not saying that everyone does that. It's just I've seen it in a couple of examples where you've got to be careful. And I've also seen, you touched on data scientists a moment ago. I've seen examples where data scientists have come into an organization, a mature organization, and they find themselves just building visualizations, or they find themselves becoming adding themselves to the reporting function. Well, actually, that's not where their skill set is. They've got far more to offer than that. Put them in the edge of the organization, see what business questions they can have answered with their skills and the data at their fingertips. And while we're talking about people, data scientists, I think more broadly speaking, stakeholder management. I think we obviously know it's something we need to do. It's an obvious thing to say, but it's also easy to forget that you've got to keep the drum banging. You can't just engage with someone once. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. Because it's a relationship. You've got to invest in that relationship. So, if any of the listeners think they've engaged with their teams and the people they need to, just double check and keep in touch with them. Put the effort in, because that continuity will reward what you're working on as well.
Yeah.
I think there's another one that's really important as well. We're in the data industry. Obviously, we're doing some great things, great work, and especially from the more mature businesses. There's an opportunity to increase our level of PR around this. So things like, are we celebrating the successes internally as much as we could be? Are we submitting our work to places like DataIQ and the DMA to win awards? Are we creating enough buzz around this that we can recruit the talent that we need? There's things like testimonials. Are we capturing those so that when it comes to putting ourselves out there as a data function, that we're putting our best selves out with the best stories that we can tell? So I think that leads on to creating a really strong brand of analytics. Really important.
Yeah, you make an excellent point there as it relates to, an area that I obviously specialize in as it relates to talent attraction and kind of building strong data teams, and, building on and shouting about those successes is a major part of how you actually attract the best talent that then enables you to keep that pipeline of successes going. So I think that's a really good point, and something that, sometimes I have to speak to businesses about being a bit less humble about their successes and actually putting themselves out there from that standpoint. So that's a really good point. And also, at the start of what you're speaking about, you mentioned a piece on essentially resource allocation and making sure that people with the high technical skills in data are doing that in terms of actually utilizing those technical skills to answer critical business questions rather than doing some more mundane stuff that actually automation can do or other people without those skills can do. So those are great points. And I guess as we wrap up here, Daryl, you started Hexdon recently. From what in our conversations and, from what I can see, that's obviously going really well and you're working on some exciting stuff. But what's some things that you're most excited about in the data space going forward in the short term?
I think, Joseph, when it comes to data this year, I think what I'm most looking forward to is when the government put out their visualizations to show us that COVID is defeated. That's what we're all looking for.
Yeah,
but course. No, COVID aside, I think AI is something that I'm just so excited by what it can do for us. And I think it's a challenge there to be less artificial in our approach to what it can do for us. And that means, being more human focused as we deploy the different models to improve what we're doing and the outcomes that we want. One example that I'm really interested in, and I'm exploring this in terms of a partnership, is a company that helps brings together data and people being employees within a business. So it's, it relates to Hexdon being human centric and sort of focused on human experience. So in a business, you have, anywhere from all the employees. Often medium to large size businesses have employee surveys. They do it once a year. And that's literally at one point, how your team is. But actually now there's capabilities out there with AI, with behavioral science built in, that allow you to longitudinally, over time, understand the performance of your teams. And that is something that I'm really excited about. It's something that I'm exploring as part of the Hexdon proposition, as well as data strategy and BI and analytics, to really bring to life. I think it's really exciting. And I think if employees and businesses can work together, both keeping their fingers on the pulse, keep their relationship going, especially when we're working from home at the moment, really valuable stuff. That's what I'm really excited to see.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so much that we can do to further leverage data and the relationship side of it as well. And last two questions, Daryl. So you've given, a lot of advice to, I guess, business leaders in building their teams and building data maturity. What's some advice that, you can give to a data professional from a career standpoint?
Yeah, for me, it's never stop learning. Never stop learning. I think the industry is moving on so fast. I just look back to Chief Martech and the number of data and marketing platforms that were out there in 2011. I think there were 180. Now there are over 8,000 platforms. Right, so the level of scale of growth is incredible. There's so much to learn. So that would be my number one recommendation. And if you're a data professional looking to expand, get more experience, partner up with people, grow your network. That's both inside the company you're working with, but also outside as well. So I think
externally, and there's definitely a lot of resources and networks where you can do that. And finally, what's the so we've spoken obviously about data maturity and data literacy. If there was kind of like a core figurehead piece of advice that you would give leaders as it relates to that, who are looking to improve that area of their business, what would it be, Daryl?
If you're a leader, culture, what does that look like for you? Work with HR on it. So important. If you can drive that culture and get it humming, performing really well, and everyone's buying into it, it's going to keep retention of your talent, and it's going to allow you to attract new talent that you need as you're growing your business. I think that for me is just the headline. That's the big thing I was sharing about.
Perfect. And I think HR sometimes play a understated role in doing that, but actually, like you said, bringing them into the fold much more will actually enable organizations to recruit more, retain more, and in turn be more successful. So I think that's a fantastic place to end, Daryl. I really appreciate your time and your expertise that you've shared with myself and the listeners. And I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Joseph. Always great chatting to you. Keep well.